everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and Wargaming are undoubtedly getting very serious on the fundamentals of balancing their game. As I've said in my previous video, we've got more buffs and nerfs to take a look at. This time it's not only going to be American tanks that are going to be addressed, there are going to be tanks in this video of 6 different nations. So without further ado, let's take a look at what's happening to 2 Czech tanks. And firstly, let me clarify that these changes are currently being super tested and that, of course, the characteristics are not final. So Wargaming are just trialing them out and see how it will be. So firstly, let's talk about the TVP VTU. This has to be one of the worst things, or probably one of the only bad things about the Czechoslovakian medium tank line. You'll know me, I love my Czechoslovakian autoloaders, but the TVP VTU has the worst win ratio of any tier 8 medium tank at 44.27 average, with this tank dealing just 674 damage per game. So it's right about now that Wargaming, well, it's actually a few years ago that Wargaming really should have done something about the TVP VTU. But if this tank has been putting you off going up the Czechoslovakian line and playing the fabulous tier 9 and tier 10, then maybe these buffs will help you out. So Wargaming are addressing 2 of the competitive guns on the TVP VTU. Firstly, the 88mm. The penetration's going up by 24 on the standard rounds and also by 15 on the premium rounds. The accuracy is going from mediocre to being pretty good, and the dispersion when you turn the turret is going from 0.12 to 0.08, meaning that, well, you probably still want to have vert stabs. It's going to be 50% better than it was previously. So you might want to consider dropping those off if you want to use vents, a gun rammer, or maybe coated optics on this tank. They're also buffing the reload of that gun from 7 seconds reload up to 6.6, which means that while previously this vehicle would have had 2057 DPM, which is really not bad at all, now it is going to be having up to 2181 DPM. That actually means that this vehicle will end up being one of the highest DPM medium tanks at tier 8, where we could see the TVP will leapfrog vehicles like even the Panther II, also going past the Object 274A, and it will be just behind the STA-1, although many of you STA-1 drivers will know that sometimes DPM doesn't make up for everything else about the tank. And I think that really is still going to be one of the problems with the TVP VTU, is it's still a tragic hull and a very big silhouette that's easy to deal with, but at least it has some firepower to be able to deal with that. And when you think that the tier 9 and the tier 10 are all about their firepower and not about that hull armor, it kind of makes sense. Some people will prefer to use the larger caliber gun on the TVP VTU. However, there is a 105mm that hits pretty hard, packing the same 320 alpha damage that you will be accustomed to from the tier 9 and the tier 10. But of course, those 2 tanks have autoloaders. So they're buffing the penetration up by 20 on the standard rounds, up by 11 on the premium rounds. The accuracy is going from being awful to being pretty okay. And the turret traverse dispersion is getting a little bit of a buff as well. Now the reload is actually getting a big buff, with the DPM of the tank going up from 1,745, and if, of course, these changes do end up taking place, the DPM will go up to 1,959, which is very nice to have 320 alpha damage. I personally will probably still end up using the 88 on this tank, but with substantial buffs to the 105, it's going to be more competitive than ever. And also, the aiming time on that 105 is going to get better as well. This will undoubtedly make the tank more usable against higher tier tanks. And while I don't think this is suddenly going to become the best vehicle you're ever going to play, it'll kind of end up being a bit like a glass cannon, like a Panther II or a Panther 88. You're still probably not going to want to play through it all that much, and I still think the goal will be to get to tier 9 or tier 10. So Wargaming are also changing the Skoda T25. This is a fabulous tier 6 Czechoslovakian medium tank that I'd be surprised if it doesn't have one of the better win ratios of any of the tier 6 mediums in the game on the last 30 days. So let's scroll down, and immediately we notice it there. Behind the VK301, the Cromwell, and the M4A3E2, there is the Skoda T25. But unfortunately, if you thought this thing was getting buffed, it's actually going to end up getting nerfed. The top speed going down 5 kilometers, the reverse speed down by 3, and also the autoloader on this tank is being substantially nerfed. The reload time is going to go from 8 seconds to 10 seconds. The aiming time is going to go from 2.1 to 2.3. And the dispersion values, when you turn, the turret are going to go from 0.12 to 0.14. While this isn't going to destroy the tank, considering the vehicle didn't exactly have a broken win ratio previously, I'm quite surprised to see Wargaming nerfing this tank, whereas I think they could have just left it as not an completely overpowered, but decent vehicle along the way. Next up, Wargaming are addressing some French vehicles as well. Firstly, 2 of the French tank destroyers. Let's start with the high tier one. The AMX AC-48 is getting a substantial hit point buff by 150. Also, it's getting dispersion buffs when you're moving the tank by roughly about 10%, but more importantly, the aiming time is getting buffed from 2.7 up to 2.5. The AMX AC-48 is already a very dangerous auto-loading tank destroyer at tier 8, and if you use the correct equipment on this tank, I think it is a perfectly playable tier 8 tank destroyer. The win ratio on this vehicle over the last 60 days hasn't exactly been excellent, however, only 3 places above the bottom of the list at 46.71, so I can see why Wargaming are trying to give this vehicle a little bit of love. And I really think that the extra hit points that this vehicle will give it that extra durability, maybe to get an extra shot out, or hopefully an entire extra magazine out against its opponents. And it also means that you're not going to get one shot at least most of the time by your Jagdpanzer 100s. Alright, let's take a look at the AMX AC MLE-46 as well. So this vehicle is getting a hit point buff, a reload buff on the 100mm. Wargaming aren't actually addressing the 90mm that you can use on this tank, however. And so it's clear to me that Wargaming want people to stop using the 90, which actually has higher DPM and is arguably the better gun, and to start use the 100. And that's because it's getting a reload buff by 0.08 seconds and an aiming time buff as well. And so that will suggest to me that the new best gun on the AMX AC-46 will indeed be the 100 and no longer the 90mm. And hopefully this is going to end up helping the vehicle, because just like its bigger brother, the vehicle hasn't exactly been performing very well. Interestingly, Wargaming are actually nerfing the BDR, which, would you actually believe, is one of the best performing vehicles tier for tier in the game. It actually has the best win ratio of any tier 5 heavy tank. It's even better than a vehicle like the KV-222. And that's because this vehicle has a really nice 90mm gun with 240 alpha damage that seems to fire very often. Wargaming are absolutely butchering the reload of this vehicle, and the DPM is going to go from 1,636 all the way down to 1,440. Ooh, yeah. BDR, it's not going to be your patch, unfortunately, if this is one of your favorite vehicles. And they're also nerfing the aiming time a little bit as well. I think this is undoubtedly a good change. If any vehicle is overperforming and creating an imbalance, then it should be adjusted. And I think a change like this isn't exactly going to kill the BDR. It'll still have quite a fun gameplay at tier 5, but it will balance it out to not just be another filthy seal clubber. Next up, we are going to be looking at Polish tanks, and this is an interesting one. Wargaming are actually nerfing the boogie. Firstly, the 100mm gun on the vehicle, which fires high explosive rounds, or as many of you will know who are some filthy seal clubbers out there, the boogie at a tier 6 medium actually has access to premium rounds on that 100mm that actually have 168mm of pen. They cost 4,000 a shot, and they give this vehicle 300 alpha damage at tier 6 and very high DPM as well. It's probably one of the most pay-to-win guns in the game from that perspective, so you really have to fire gold to make it work. So for Wargaming to only be nerfing the aim time of that, it's definitely going to hit the boogie a little bit, but it's not exactly addressing the pay-to-win on that tank. But Wargaming are nerfing the 90mm as well. So if you didn't want to pay to win on the boogie and you only want to use the 90mm, well, things are going to get a little bit worse for you, as the accuracy is going from bad to really bad, and the reload is getting nerfed by 0.4 seconds as well, which will drop the DPM to roughly about 1,600 on this tank. And it's very interesting for me that Wargaming are doing this, because the boogie doesn't exactly have the win ratio of the Cromwell or even the Skoda T25. And I have to admit, it does feel as if when Wargaming are trying to address these branches, it's a bit bizarre that they're picking vehicles. Also, the CS44, I don't think anyone ever thought that the CS44 really needed an aim time nerf, but apparently Wargaming do. Let's take a look to see how the CS44 is performing. Well, to be fair, it does have the second best win ratio. But if they're nerfing this, then hopefully we're going to be seeing that they're nerfing the T34-1 as well, because that clearly is the better tank. Well, okay, a very small nerf to the CS44, the 100mm by 0.4 seconds on its aim time. That's all that Wargaming feel like they need to do. I personally think that the better gun on the CS44 was the 90mm in my opinion, because you can have that better DPM and that better accuracy, and as long as you're willing to fire some gold rounds, you've still got 202mm of pen rather than 220 heat, I guess. So maybe with the nerf to this 100mm, the better gun is now going to be the 90mm on the Polish medium. That's it for Poland. Now, some more American changes, and this is an interesting one. A vehicle that I literally just made a video about, playing the worst tier 6 tanks. Yeah, it's the M4A3E8 Sherman. Wargaming are buffing the hit points. Depending on which turret that you have, it's going to go up by, well, 60 for both of them. They're also improving the dispersion during the hull movement to 0.16 on the upgraded tracks, and the accuracy of the gun from 0.4 to 0.38, which will mean that you should probably think about dropping the accuracy device on this vehicle if you were choosing to use one, and definitely invest into vertical stabilizers. And they're also improving the aiming time. That is going to make this thing pretty voracious. But Wargaming, I think the only thing that you're really not addressing on this vehicle has to be that awful penetration. What is 128mm of pen to do against a tier 8 tank? And even if you load the gold, you've still only got 177. Now, if you manage to get into a nice matchup, that will make the Sherman a deadly vehicle to contend with. But still going to be an absolute brutal one against higher tier tanks. Wargaming are also nerfing 2 collector's tank destroyers. Firstly, the T40, it's going to lose hit points, it's going to lose view range, it's going to have worse aim time and reload on both of the vehicle's guns, including that filthy 105mm. This is a huge nerf to the T40. Losing that view range will really stop it from being able to spot its opponents at decent distances, and to also have a massive nerf to the dispersion when it turns the gun as well. That's absolutely brutal. Does anyone remember back in the day when the T40 used to have 400 meters view range, I think it was, and it had even more gun depression than it does now? It was an absolute broken tank, and I would get on average about 4 kills a game in this vehicle at low tier when I was SEAL clubbing. To see this vehicle nerfed, I'm not even sure if really that many people were playing this tank, but maybe I don't even know. Was it a popular tank? Was it one of the most played vehicles? How far down this list do we have to scroll to find the T40? Maybe I must have missed it. Where is it? There we go. Apparently 72,000 battles were fought in the T40 in the last 60 days. And while clearly the vehicle has been overperforming, which is why Wargaming would probably want to adjust it, it seems like such a weird tank to target if it's not really being played all that much. But then again, I like Wargaming's methodical approach, and just because I'm a high tier player and I don't really care about the state of low tiers all that much, it is an important aspect of the game. Future players are starting the game now. You know, those future players that you will be meeting in your tier 8 and your tier 10 tanks will be having to deal with T40s, one-shotting them and making them quit and go and play a game which is better balanced. So, you know what? Thumbs up to you, Wargaming, for making these changes, especially to the T67. It has been too long for the T67 to not be addressed once again. And everyone will remember that the T67 has been nerfed before, a lot like the T40. Wargaming are nerfing the view range by 20 meters. That is huge on this tank. That means that you are going to struggle to be able to spot your opponents at the 445 meters mark, even if you're using binoculars on this. They're also nerfing the reverse speed of the vehicle, and they are nerfing the reload time by 0.5 seconds. That is massive. Meaning the DPM of this tank is going to go from 2,156 all the way down to 1,864. I mean, look, that's still a great DPM to have on a tier 5 tank destroyer, but is it going to be this completely broken OP powerhouse that can shred multiple tanks a minute? No. So I think this is a great change by Wargaming. The T67 is a filthy seal clubbing padding tank, and I really like the fact that they're addressing vehicles that are no longer in the tech tree that seal clubbers are using to be able to go and farm the puppies. This will hopefully further shed down the win ratio of the T67, which is currently sitting at the top of the tank destroyer list, even above some of the premium tanks at tier 5. Next up, there are some Soviet changes as well. The KV-1S. Wow. I know obviously Wargaming are clearly buffing and nerfing the vehicles, which are based on their win ratios. And so in the video that I made last week when I played the tier 6 tanks, it just feels, it's obviously just purely a coincidence, but it's great to see the 2 out of the 4 vehicles that I played last week already are getting substantial buffs. Firstly, hit points. 970 up to 1,100. That is truly going to make this thing feel like a heavy tank. Also, Wargaming are buffing the aim time on the 85mm, and they're buffing the traverse speed substantially from 30 up to 38. That will make this thing very dynamic and be able to get around. And while they're not increasing the DPM of any of the guns, that durability will substantially help. You might even want to take a durability module on this vehicle and really pump those hit points up. I still don't think it's going to really be as good as a VK3601, but this will definitely help the KV-1S. Also, Wargaming are nerfing the Tier 4 Soviet tank destroyer, the Su-85B. Hit points down, view range down, now to a point where even binoculars aren't really going to allow you to be able to see your opponent, and they're nerfing the reload substantially on the 85mm gun and the accuracy as well. So Su-85, I guess your seal clubbing days are numbered. But it surprises me that Wargaming aren't addressing the Su-76G and the Marder as well. But I guess we haven't quite hit China yet when I think about it. And if we go back to the start, oh yeah, there it is. The Su-76G FT is going to lose hit points and a lot of view range. 320 down to 300. Its aim time is going to get substantially worse, accuracy worse, and its reload time is going to be butchered. Again, a vehicle that clearly did need a nerf, as it is packing a 53.5% average win ratio at tier 4. Looks like it's going to be the best time ever to play your low tier tanks. And also, finally, Wargaming are buffing up the Type 58. It's going to gain hit points by 60, and it's going to gain penetration, finally, 128 up to 144, which might actually make this thing playable until you realize that even if they did buff this vehicle up like that, it's still going to be absolutely tragic when you compare it to something like a T-34-85M, the premium tank, which has better DPM, better pen, better armor, and importantly, 2 extra degrees of gun depression. So while the Type 58 is going to be in the best position it's ever going to be, it's still going to be a pretty shocking vehicle. And so, ladies and gents, Wargaming buffing and nerfing more vehicles in 6 different nations. You know what? Again, massive props to you, Wargaming. I've looked at the statistics of the win ratios, and I really don't think you're making too many mistakes here. I think you're helping to address some of the, should we say, the blocks that stop people from going up the tech trees. And clearly a vehicle like the TVP VTU was something which you spent free experience or blueprints on. So for Wargaming to be addressing these things, which probably is going to end up kind of costing them money in a way, as people no longer really need to blueprint or free experience through these tanks. But I guess it will attract a whole new load of players to a line where previously maybe they just gave up. And I really like Wargaming's attention to some tanks that are just what some weirdos play thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And I know, unfortunately, a few of you out there are probably not going to like me for that opinion, but boys and girls, if a vehicle is clearly absolutely outrageously performing compared to other vehicles and it becomes too much of a meta, this is what naturally needs to happen to try and make it fair for everyone, irrelevant of what tiers you manage to play. And Wargaming, if there's one thing that I'd like to see you do in addition, while I really like the changes you're making to the M4A3E8 Sherman, I think that the penetration on this gun is just too low. And when I see you increasing penetration on vehicles like the Type 58 and also increasing penetration on the TVP VTU, come on. Give the all-American classic a little bit of penetration love as well. And then it could become that kind of furious vehicle that a lot of people love to play. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today's video. Really hope you enjoyed it and you liked my analysis and the breakdown of why these buffs and nerfs are happening and which vehicles I think are going to be hot and not. If you did, then make sure you give the video a thumbs up. But if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about all of these changes. Do you think Wargaming are targeting the right tanks? Do you think that they may be targeting the wrong tanks? Wargaming are actively monitoring your feedback, so make sure you let them know what you think. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.